Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Wednesday, March 13th slate of college basketball DFS. So, at the time of recording, DraftKings has an early slate up and FanDuel has an early slate up. And I am not certain when they're going to get their night slates up. So, what we're going to do here in this episode is we're going to give our full breakdown of the early slate. And then, maybe by the time we're done, maybe by the time we're wrapped up with that, we can see what we can string together for the night slate. But I am going to talk about both slates. So, make sure you check out the timestamps on YouTube as well as on the audio in case you are wanting to just get to the night slate as opposed to the early slate. But I did want to get it out there that this is going to cover both slates. Now, I don't think we're going to do a full breakdown of 20 different games here on the show, but, we're going to have definitely a little bit of information for both slates. Now, I cannot say with certainty right now what our schedule for the rest of the week is going to look like. Given that these slates are going to be very touch and go, it might be a type of week where we have an episode come out in the night, maybe an episode come out in the morning. I don't know what the rest of the week is going to look like, but what I do know is that if you want all of our college basketball content through the rest of college basketball season, including March Madness, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you are following me on Twitter as well for any updates. And then, if there's ever a slate or you can't find an episode or you want thoughts on something that's not covered in an episode, there's ways you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. You can also join the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description. Y'all, I do believe that we have the best college basketball DFS Discord around. There's a lot of smart people who have won a lot of money playing college basketball DFS this year. We're all bouncing ideas off each other, talking plays, talking strategy all day long, and sweating it out together as well. And it's just a great community to be a part of. So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, or if you want to chop it up with me, the Fantasy Corner Discord is where you can get that. All right, so I do believe that does it for the introduction. But like I said, you're going to want to make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Next week is a big time week for us. What I'm planning on doing is Sunday night having a live bracket reaction show. And then Monday, we're going to have the bracket breakdown. And then Tuesday through Friday, it's going to be DFS for the first round games, all the way right rolling into the second round games and beyond. So make sure you are subscribed so that way you can be with us for all that, because this is the best time of the year to be a college basketball fan. So with that being said, we're in conference championship week. Tomorrow, Wednesday, is the day where conference tournament week really starts for me, because all the teams that I follow are going to be in action. My Texas Longhorns are playing at night. My alma mater, the Charlotte 49ers, are playing at night. The local team, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons, are playing during the day. So going to be a lot of college basketball on in my house tomorrow. Really looking forward to this Wednesday. And so let's go ahead and start by breaking down this early slate. All right, so the first game of the slate is going to be Florida State taking on Virginia Tech in the ACC tournament. This one is going to be one of the best games that you are going to want to target on this early slate. KenPom has it projected to be 78-75 in favor of Virginia Tech, and this is a matchup that's been played twice this season. FSU won the first meeting 77-74, and Virginia Tech won the second meeting 83-75. The reason why these two games have been so high scoring is FSU likes to get up and down the floor. They currently rank 29th in the nation according to Tempo. Virginia Tech not nearly as high, so this is a pace up spot for them. Now, what's interesting about this slate to me is this slate lacks a lot of star power at the top, right? Like there's no Zach Edey, there's no Armando Bacot, there's no Kyle Filipowski, there's no Mark Sears. Like there's just no super expensive guys at the top, right? So what you're seeing is a lot of guys who would normally be like in the mid to high range, like the upper 7K and lower 8K range on DraftKings, are now in the 8K range. Sean Padua and Jameer Watkins in this game are two of those guys. So there's going to be a lot of times on this slate where, in terms of a points per dollar play, guys don't look so great. But then you have to remember, pricing is a little bit inflated because there just aren't that many stars. And so you might have to learn how to kind of swallow the poor price a little bit here on this slate, just because you're kind of going to have to, right? Now, on the FSU side, this is a very interesting matchup to me because FSU is supremely athletic at all spots on the floor, and Virginia Tech is not. Like, in the words of Rick Pitino, Virginia Tech's pretty slow laterally, right? So what happens is you can kind of see these athletes for FSU have good games against Virginia Tech. Jameer Watkins is really my primary interest for FSU. In both the games against Virginia Tech, he had over a 30% usage rate. The first time it only turned into 23 fantasy points because he was 2 for 13 from the field. But the second time they played, he found his scoring touch, was 7 for 9 from the field, and put up 49 fantasy points. So he does bring you that legitimate upside, which, oh, by the way, he's coming off of also a 46 fantasy point performance against Miami. And he's not really all that shot dependent because he really doesn't shoot the ball all that much. And he just does so much in every other aspect of his game with the rebounds, with the assists, with the steals that he can hit value in a ton of different ways. And I'm even willing to play him at that salary of 8,500, and I think he makes for a great game stacking option. If you were to stack anybody else on Florida State, Cam Corrin has kind of taken over as their best big man recently. He's played 31 minutes or 30 minutes in 3 straight games, and FSU normally doesn't do that. FSU normally plays their bigs about 20 to 25 minutes, and they normally play 2 or 3 of them like that much. So to see Cam Corrin really take off and get 30 minutes in 3 straight games, to me, that's a really good sign for what he can do moving forward because he's generally a pretty good points per minute player. He just really had never seen his minutes totals be that big until he got to the last 3 games. And his performances in the last 3 games have just been okay, 23, 40, and 18. But I am willing to buy the fact that if he's playing extended minutes, he's going to put up extended fantasy points. Darren Green is also the guy who had the big game against Miami with 40 fantasy points. I don't necessarily want to go chasing that, but I do think he's a pretty good matchup against this Virginia Tech team where he is going to have an athleticism advantage on the outside. And then Primo Spears is a guy that I like a lot because he plays with a huge usage rate. He is actually second on the team in usage. He comes off the bench and he just chucks, for lack of a better way of saying it. 3 of the last 5 games, he's taken 14 shots, really good shot rate. The fantasy point totals have been pretty good. In 4 of the last 5, he's at 19 fantasy points or more, which would be 4x value for his current salary. So I really do like what we're getting out of Primo Spears. And kind of the same deal with Cam Corrin, right? Like, he doesn't play the most minutes usually. So what if he were to play 30 plus minutes in that game? I think that there would be an opportunity for him to put up fancy points in bunches because if he's out on the floor, he's going to be taking a ton of shots. Now, what I will say is I don't necessarily think Primo Spears is a guy that I would stack with a lot of other Florida State guys because if Primo Spears is doing well, it's because Primo Spears is shooting the ball. There's not going to be a whole lot of other guys that are probably going to get there if he does. Now, on the Virginia Tech side, Lynn Kidd is some injury news that you're going to want to monitor. So, Mike Young has said that he will be good to go for this conference tournament game, but he did miss the last game of the regular season. And he's been pretty doggone good against FSU in the one that Virginia Tech won. He had 33 fantasy points in 28 minutes. That's a really good point per minute clip. And I'm definitely willing to roll him out. We have seen rebounding bigs do well against Florida State for the entire season. Sean Padula is also a guy that we have to talk about. So he has over a 30% usage rate on the season and a 30% assist rate as well. But those rates go up even more when he plays FSU. In both the games against FSU, let me rephrase. In the win that they played against FSU, Sean Padula had a 39% usage rate. He was also north of a 30% usage rate in the one that they lost. Now, the fantasy point totals weren't as great as you would expect. He only had 31 and 31 and 30 fantasy points in those 2 games. But it was because he didn't really put up the same peripheral stats that we're accustomed to. He also turned the ball over quite a bit. So I do think that there is a big time opportunity for Sean Padula to have a good game here in this one. And I think that if you're willing to, put a lot of salary into this game, you can go with like a Watkins and Padula stack and hope that those 2 stars just go off. Now, I also think it's highly likely the one of Hunter Couture or MJ Collins ends up going off in this game. They are the wing shooters for this Virginia Tech team. And against FSU, the most recent time they played, Hunter Couture had 31 fantasy points, did a lot scoring, and got some peripheral stats as well. But recently, it's been MJ Collins that has been the hot hand. He's put up 30 fantasy points in the last 2 games. So I do think that one of these 2 guys is probably going to hit value and probably going to have a pretty good night. But I probably wouldn't try playing both of them in the same lineup. And I think you can pass on it also, but I do think that it's more likely than not that one of those 2 guys has a pretty good performance. Now, also worth noting, the last time these 2 teams played, Robbie Barron really struggled with the athleticism of Florida State, and they played Tower Nickel more as a small ball. For Tower Nickel turned into 29 minutes and 23 fantasy points, which we would be A-okay with at his current salary. So I do think Tower Nickel is definitely a value play to look out for. Game number 2 is going to be UCF taking on BYU. Now, UCF is actually a deceptively good defensive team. They actually rank 10th in the nation in defensive efficiency on KenPom. And BYU is a team that does not like to push the tempo, and they also play pretty stout defense. KenPom has this game projected to be 76-70 in favor of BYU. The first time that these 2 teams played, BYU won 63-58. This is not exactly the game environment that you want to target because on the UCF side, there's some real issues here. Darius Johnson is priced up to $8,500, and I played him a little bit today on the early slate, the Tuesday Tuesday slate, and he put up 31 fantasy points, which is not bad, but like he's not consistently at the usage rate or the shot rate that you need him to be at $8,500. Like this is one of the guys that I was talking about earlier, where you really got to kind of swallow the price tag, and I would rather swallow the price tag on some other guys than Darius Johnson right now. I am really surprised to see Jalen Sellers down as low as he is. He was a guy that was priced like even or past Darius Johnson earlier in the season, and now there's $3,000 worth of salary separating them. And I do think that he's still the same player. Like the usage is still there, the shot attempts are still there, and I'm definitely willing to roll the dice with him at 5,500 as a GPP play. Now, the last time they played BYU, he took 17 shots, which led the team and put up 25 fantasy points. So definitely willing to give Jalen Sellers a roll of the dice. Also worth noting, Ibrahim Diallo had the game of his life against Oklahoma State today. Was 7 for 13 from the field, 17 and 11 with 2 blocks and 3 steals, put up 41 fantasy points, and he was in the optimal lineup on the early slate. But here's the downside. The reason why I didn't play a lot of him on the early slate was because A, I'm not Nostradamus, but B, there's a lot of bigs that play for UCF. And so to try to pin down one of them that's going to go off is really tough. Even in this game, the best game he's had all season, Diallo only had 23 minutes played. And I hate to break it to you, but 23 minutes is not going to get you enough like opportunities to score fantasy points against BYU. It's just not. And they're going to play 4 other bigs. They're going to play Walker, Payne, Silla, and Avery. They're all going to get minutes. They're all going to have an opportunity to shine too. So I am not chasing the big performance from Ibrahim Diallo. And if he beats me, he beats me. Now, BYU is a really frustrating team to target in DFS because they spread the ball around and spread their usage around so much. I know that's the sign of a quality basketball team, but in DFS, it's really annoying. Spencer Johnson is probably their best all-around player. He had 39 fantasy points in their last game against Oklahoma State. Only 22 against UCF, though, but he was 2 for 9 from the floor. He's a guy who can fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways, but I really don't like the price tag at $6,900. Jackson Robinson is an interesting one. He comes off the bench now, but he has a really good fantasy point per minute ratio because he generally has a really high usage rate when he comes in off the bench. So I definitely don't mind playing him. Against UCF, the last time these two teams played, he played 26 minutes and put up 26 fantasy points. But the guys I'm most interested in for BYU are their 2 big fellas. So Fousseyni Traore is one of the best fantasy point per minute options on the entire slate. And kind of goes like with what I was saying about Cam Corrin, except he hasn't done it yet, is he puts up such a good rate of fantasy points per minute that what would happen if Fousseyni Traore actually played 30 minutes in a game? I mean, just look at his recent game logs. 23 minutes, 32 fantasy points. 17 minutes, 25 fantasy points. 23 minutes, 33 fantasy points. Like he just consistently puts up over 1 fantasy point per minute. And so if we ever get a game where he plays 30, he has the chance to just absolutely nuke the slate. And it's because he has such a high usage rate when they feed him in the low post when he's in there. He draws fouls and gets to the foul line. And he's a really good rebounder and shot blocker as well. So I really do like Fousseyni Traore at 6,400. Now, the reason why he doesn't play 30 minutes a game is because they have Ali Khalifa, former Charlotte 49er. Ali Khalifa, the Egyptian Jokic, they called him when he was at Charlotte. He is a supreme passer at the center position, and they can run a lot of their offense through him. And it's why you see Khalifa also have really good fantasy point per minute performances. Last 2 games, 16 minutes and 23 fantasy points, 23 minutes and 22 fantasy points. Like both of these guys are just super intriguing plays to me because what if Mark Pope just decides to give one of them 30 minutes? Well, obviously the other one is going to be screwed, but the one that plays 30 is going to have an opportunity to absolutely nuke the slate. Game number 3 is Notre Dame taking on Wake Forest. KenPom has this one projected to be 72-63 in favor of Wake. This is a rematch of a game earlier in the season where Notre Dame won at their home court 70-65, which really put a lot of pressure on Wake Forest's NCAA tournament hopes. And they go into this week needing 2, maybe even 3 wins to make the NCAA tournament. So they're going to have to get their first one here against Notre Dame. This is going to be a desperate Wake Forest team, in my opinion. Now, on the Notre Dame side, we have the benefit of being able to see them play today and see what they do in a conference tournament environment. I mentioned this a little bit on my Patreon today, but what conference tournaments tend to do to teams, they tend to play little shorter rotations and tend to roll with the guys they trust, and they tend to really get the ball in their best players' hands because this is a 1-game win or go home scenario for all these teams, whether they're in the NCAA tournament or not. They all want to win their conference tournament. And you kind of see everybody play with a little bit more desperation. Nobody's really cared about development or egos or anything like that. Nah, they're doing what they can to win the basketball game. And so that's why you tend to see usages for best players elevate. You tend to see rotation shorten. You tend to see coaches let guys play with 2, 3, and 4 fouls more often because they know that the one game is going to determine their postseason lives. So for Notre Dame, we have a 1 game sample size of this. And what we saw in that game was Marcus Burton up to his same old tricks, over a 30% usage rate against Georgia Tech, put up 40 fancy points, and that was with dealing with foul trouble the whole game. And he was really not aggressive defensively once he got in foul trouble. Now, in the previous game against Wake, he also had north of a 30% usage rate and put up 49 fancy points. He also didn't get bumped up in price. He's only $7,800. I think that Marcus Burton is one of the best pay up options on the slate, and I will stand by that. Now, for the rest of the Notre Dame side, they actually played 4 guys over 30 minutes in their game today against Georgia Tech, which they normally don't always do. Tay Davis played over 30 minutes. Now, granted, he didn't turn into a whole lot. He only put up 20 fantasy points, but he's only 5,500. He's at a totally reasonable salary to put that up. Braden Shrewsbury is only 4,800, and he played 35 minutes and put up 30 fantasy points on 8 for 12 shooting. He was their second leader in field goal attempts behind Marcus Burton, and I think he is at an absolutely great price. Even though this game environment doesn't look great, the fact that if he plays 30 minutes again, he's very likely to smash that price tag of $4,800. And then Kevin Ajee was the other guy that played over 30 minutes. And he really hadn't done that all season long, if I'm not mistaken. Well, he hadn't done that since January 9th against Georgia Tech. But he played 33 minutes again against Georgia Tech, put up 21 fantasy points, and only needed 1 attempt from the field to do so. If you were to tell me about this slate tomorrow, hey, Mike, Kevin Ajee is going to play more than 30 minutes, I would go ahead and lock him in every lineup. Like, he is a guy who is a great rebounder, can score it because he draws a lot of fouls. And if he's going to be able to stay on the floor and stay out of foul trouble, he's going to put up fancy points that can smash that salary of $3,900. I think these Notre Dame guys are a lot of the biggest misprices on the slate. Now, on the Wake Forest side, we mentioned how this is a desperate Wake Forest team, right? Well, in the last game they played against Notre Dame, Kevin Boopy Miller led them in usage, took 16 shots, put up 27 fancy points. He is generally hit or miss, but his usage is not. So if you are a usage rate truther, you should continue to roll out Kevin Miller and just hope that eventually, the ceiling game comes to him. Efton Reed is an interesting one because all he has to do seemingly is stay out of foul trouble and he'll put up a massive performance. But the question is whether he will or not. Well, the last game against Notre Dame, he was able to stay out of foul trouble. He played 30 minutes, put up 30 fantasy points. I do like Efton Reed here on this slate as well. But when you're talking about Wake Forest, you got to talk about Hunter Sallis. He is their best player, their best two-way player for that matter. And to me, when the game is on the line, when you've got the one guy you need to get the ball in the hands of, they're getting it into the hands of Hunter Sallis. And it's $7,900. He's at a very reasonable price tag. He's hit 35 fantasy points in each of his last 2 games. And against Notre Dame, the previous time he really struggled, he had 19 fantasy points, but he was 2 for 11 from the field. So if he were to just able to shoot the ball his normal, more efficient self, then he would be easily able to hit value at this price tag of $7,900. But what I will warn you about Hunter Sallis is I generally don't stack Hunter Sallis with other Wake Forest players because when he hits value, it's generally off of isolation buckets where there's not a whole lot of assists to be found to him or from him. So Hunter Sallis is probably like my one and only play from Wake, or I'm going to end up looking at Miller and Reed. Game number 4 of the slate is Oklahoma taking on TCU. Now, this one is going to be an interesting one. This one, we've got a little bit of injury news to deal with coming in. KenPom has this one projected to be 75-74 in favor of TCU. TCU also won the first meeting between these two teams earlier this season, 80-71. The big injury news here for Oklahoma is that John Hughley is going to continue to be out, and Rivaldo Soares is going to miss this game as well. Now, Jalen Moore has turned into Oklahoma's best player. With them dealing with a lot of injuries. He's put up 30 fantasy points in 3 straight and 4 out of 5. I think he is a great cash game option. I wish he were a little cheaper. Javian McCollum is also back, and he was their best player before he got hurt. And so I think he is worth a look for that reason. We've seen guards with a high assist rate do really well against TCU this season. That would be McCollum and Uzan. Now, the most direct beneficiary of the Soares injury is going to be Latrey Darthard. He got the start 2 games ago when JV McCullum was out, played 41 minutes, put up 24 fantasy points. He has the potential to do that again with Suarez out, and he has been playing more minutes lately than Otega Owe, who started the season in the starting lineup but now comes off the bench and hasn't been producing much at all. So between the two of them, I would rather play Darthard than Owe. If they were priced even, I would still probably rather play Darthard than Owe, but the fact that Owe is $1,000 more and is playing minutes behind Darthard, I think it almost makes him unplayable unless you're looking to just be a GPP ownership pivot guy and hope that everybody else plays Darthard and Owe is the one that has the big game. Now for TCU, they've also had some injuries as well. Ernest Udeh Jr. is back into the starting lineup for them, where he missed about a month. So that really kind of kills a lot of the value that they had at the center position, because now you're going to see minutes from Coles, Udeh, and Mustafa and Corkin. It's just kind of a mess. Jameer Ellison Jr. is their usage leader on the season, and if they're going to do what we talked about earlier, where they really condense their rotation and give the ball in the hands of their best players, this is the guy who's going to benefit. He generally doesn't play more than 30 minutes in a game. He generally doesn't get to take more than 11 shots in a game. But if they're going to be a team that really condenses themselves in conference tournament season, Nelson Jr. is going to be the guy that does that, even though I do think he is a hair overpriced at $7,200. All right, that does it for the first 4 games. So let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to break down the last 3 from the early slate. All right, so next up on the slate, we do have USC taking on Washington in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament. This is the game with the highest total on the slate. KenPom has Washington projected to win 79-76 with a 155-point total. This is a rematch of a meeting earlier this season where USC won. It feels like this was just like a week ago. USC won 82-73, so that 155-point total held up there pretty well also. Now, for USC, in that game against Washington, Isaiah Collier was really the guy that made the engine go. And in that game, he had a 37% usage rate, which is massive. He took 20 shots from the field, put up 38 fantasy points. So what I do like is the fact that clearly the Trojans were willing to hand the ball over to Collier and let him do his thing. That they used him to attack this Washington defense. And, they ended up winning the game, so they're probably going to go back to it. The downside is it only turned into 38 fantasy points. So if he needed a 37% usage rate to put up 38 fantasy points, legitimately, what is his ceiling here on this slate? Like I said, I do think it's a good sign that he did have that usage rate and he did have that good performance, but how much better could it actually get is my question. So I do like Isaiah Collier, but I do understand that he probably doesn't have as high of a ceiling as some of the other 8K plays here on the slate. Now, Kobe Johnson, Boogie Ellis, and DJ Rodman are kind of the other guys who are playing a ton of minutes and seeing a ton of usage right now for USC. And after that, it's just been kind of a revolving door between the other guys. Awuchukwu and Morgan are kind of swapping minutes at center. Bronny James only comes in to really spell one of the main three guards. So I probably would keep my USC efforts focused to the top 4 guys. And even at that, I really think all of them except for Collier are really overpriced. Kobe Johnson is a guy who can put up stats in a variety of ways. He did have 36 fantasy points against Washington, played 36 minutes, only took 8 shots in that game. So maybe he's a guy that might have a little bit of upside. But I really do think that Johnson and Collier would probably be the main 2 guys I'm targeting on USC. Now, on the Washington side, we have a development. Okay, so Xavier Wilder has been the point guard for Washington the entire season since he was originally healthy. I do think he missed the first game or 2 for this team, right? Now, Corin Johnson has now moved into the starting lineup to replace Xavier Wilder. And if you look at the fantasy production, Corin Johnson has been brilliant. If you look at the last 7 games, he's had a ceiling of 45, but he has hit 30 fantasy points in 5 of those 7 games. That's pretty doggone good, especially for a guy who's only 7,600. He's taken a ton of shots too. And, I compare this kind of to Khalif Battle, who we're going to talk about a little bit for the night section. You could see this run coming if you looked at the usage rates. He's had over a 23% usage rate in 7 straight games. So the usage is there. It's not a flash in the pan. He's in the starting lineup now, and I do think that he's a guy who has a ton of upside against a USC defense that, by the way, he just put up 37 fantasy points played against while only playing 29 minutes. Now he's in the starting lineup. He could play way more than 29 minutes, and he could easily outpace that 37 fantasy point performance that he already had. Big fan of Corin Johnson here on this slate. And also, when you talk about Washington, you got to be a fan of Keon Brooks as well. We talked about all season how USC can be exploited by bigs. Well, Keon Brooks kind of more of a 3 to a 4, but he kind of fits the mold as well. He's had 35 fantasy points in 3 straight games, maintained a high usage rate all season long, right around 26%. And against USC, he put up 35 fantasy points on 14 shots. So big Keon Brooks fan for cash games. I think he has an incredibly high floor here in this game. Now, after that, I got to be honest, I'm not really intrigued by the rest of the Washington side. I just don't think there's a whole lot of value there. A lot of the shots are going to be taken by Brooks and Johnson and even Wheeler when he comes in the game. And so I'm just not that interested in any of the other guys. Next up, we do have Xavier taking on Butler. There are some value plays in this game that I'm a little more interested in. So, Ken Pom has this game projected to be 77 to 76 in favor of Xavier for 153-point total. These two teams have already played twice this season. They actually played on the last day of the regular season for Butler. Butler had a bye kind of afterwards, but that game was 72 to 66 in favor of Butler. The earlier meeting was 85 to 71 in favor of Xavier. So for Xavier, we've talked about all season long, they have big three guards, Olivari, McKnight, and Claude. They have games where one of them gets there. They have games where two of them gets there. They even have games occasionally where all three of them get there. But generally speaking, these guys are the ones who run the show. And generally speaking, lately it has been Olivari who has been the best. Out of his last 5 games, he has had 2 games over 45 fantasy points. He tends to get there not only because he's a good scorer, but because he gets you a lot of peripheral stats as well with rebounds and assists. And he does have enough upside as a scorer that when he has his big scoring nights, he does have big time fantasy outputs because of the scoring and the peripherals combined. McKnight is a little more assist dependent and generally doesn't bring the same scoring punch. I don't think he has anywhere near the ceiling that Olivari does. And if I'm playing GPPs, I'm primarily going to target Olivari over McKnight. And I do like Desmond Claude as well. He's actually taken more shots than the other 2 guards in the last 3 games combined, but only one of those fantasy performances was good. He had 48 fantasy points against Georgetown. He's also a guy who can fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways, but I kind of think you got to make your stand between Olivari and Claude here on this one. Now, Sean Miller said in a press conference a few weeks ago that he wanted to switch up the rotation with the big men. And to his credit, he did that. He had moved Kachi Nze into the starting lineup. He also had games where Gaitis Namicha started. He had a game where he started Daywin Swain as a small ball 4. But the last game is really the interesting one. So Nze started, right? Kachi Nze played 10 minutes, put up 8 fantasy points, and he had a few good fantasy point performances before that, right? Abu Usman has kind of been the one constant. He came off the bench one game, but it was like a really good game. He had 38 fantasy points when he came off the bench, but he's been pretty consistently playing between like 15 to 25 minutes as a part of the starting lineup. Well, the guy who's came on strong lately is Lazar Djokovic, who is sitting at $3,500 on DraftKings. In the previous game against Butler, he played 15 minutes and had 10 fantasy points. It's not great, but it's not terrible for a guy at 3,500. And then in their most recent game against Marquette, he played 33 minutes and had 19 fantasy points. I like that a lot, right? Like if you give me a guy at $3,500 who might play 33 minutes, that's a really that's a bargain I can sign up for, right? And I think he is one of the best punt value plays on the slate because if he plays 33 minutes again, he's probably going to smash that price tag. Now on the Butler side, they're a little bit different. They operate off of one primary guard, and that is Posh Alexander. In that last game against Xavier, he played 35 minutes and had 40 total fantasy points on only 10 shots. But Posh is a guy who fills up the stat sheet in a variety of ways, like including assists, blocks, and steals. And so that's how he's able to hit value in fantasy in a variety of games, is because he doesn't always need to score a ton to get there. And so I really do like Posh Alexander as a play 8,100. I've talked about him all season long. I think he's a premier game stacking option because as a guy who puts up a ton of peripheral stats, if a game gets going up and down and scores a lot of points, that's a lot of possessions, a lot of opportunities for him to put up a lot of different stats on the stat sheet. I also really do like Jalen Thomas here in this one. Against Xavier, the last time they met, he only played, or I'm sorry, not only, he did play 32 minutes, which is quite a lot for him. Put up 23 fantasy points. And like, if you were to sit here and make that same bargain with me, like about Kevin Ajay I said earlier, like if you're willing to tell me that Jalen Thomas is going to play 30 minutes, I'm probably going to put him in my lineup every time because he's a really good rebounder. And generally speaking, when he plays 30 minutes, he gets to a double-double. So I really do like Jalen Thomas at $6,100. We've played bigs against Xavier all season long. Those would probably be my primary 2 guys here for this Butler team, but I do think you can supplement them with the wing shooters, Brooks and Davis, or maybe even more of like a slasher in Jamil Telfort. I think those guys are more support plays, though, as opposed to guys that I would just play as one-offs. Now, the last game of the slate, is going to be between Oregon State and UCLA, and this is the lowest total of the slate according to KenPom. KenPom has it at 66 to 62 in favor of UCLA. These two teams have played twice already this season. UCLA swept the season series 69 to 62 and 71 to 63. On the Oregon State side, it's pretty ugly. Like the last time they played, Tower Bilda was their leading scorer in fantasy, and he only had 25 fantasy points. That's just not going to cut it. Now, if you are a usage rate truther, Jordan Pope would be a guy that you would have to go with. He has been their best scorer all season long. He's hit 35 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, and he's only $7,000. Like, I think he's a guy that I can get behind, but I do think the game environment is terribly ugly, and I think that the likelihood is more likely that he puts up somewhere in the range of like 28 to 32 fantasy points as a getting to that 35 that he had been accustomed to recently. Michael Rataj and Dexter Akano are going to play a ton of minutes, but they're just hit or miss fantasy options. And in a game environment that's only projected to have 128 points, it's more likely than not that they're going to miss. The rest of the Oregon State rotation is an absolute mess. Casey Abikwe and Chol Marial and Thomas Ndong split minutes at the center spot with Abikwe and Marial really kind of alternating who starts. It's really weird. There's not really a consistent pattern. And so I don't really think there's anything you can bank on outside the top 4. And like I said, that's not much you can bank on for this Oregon State Beavers team. Now, on the UCLA side, they're a little more interesting. So they have gone to a little more of a small ball lineup recently where Adem Bona starts at the 5, and that has worked out really well for him. 2 of the last 5 games, he's been over 35 fantasy points. His usage rate has gone through the roof, and the last time that he played Oregon State, he put up 27 fantasy points, which is pretty solid, but I think that he's in a better spot now with where he's coming in terms of his usage and what he's done statistically lately. And what I also like about Adem Bona is he has shown the ability to hit value in games that are poor game environments. The most recent game that they played against Arizona State was 59 to 47. That's a 107 point total. No, 106 point total. Wow, I'm a high school math teacher and I did that wrong in my head. 106 point total, and he put up 44 fantasy points. So Adem Bona, definitely a really solid option on this UCLA team, and I would probably be playing him as a one-off. If I play anybody else from the UCLA team, Lazar Stefanovic and Sebastian Mack are shot-dependent guards that maybe one of them goes off. Like they're good enough scorers that they can do that. But if they do, I would definitely be as a one-off play because they're not really correlated. They don't really get a whole lot of assists. And if they're going off, it likely means that the other guys are suffering. Dylan Andrews is a guy that I do think you can stack though because he has a decent assist rate. He's also led this team in total shots in the last 4 games. He's also led this team in total usage in the last 4 games. And what it's turned into is he did have a ceiling performance of 44 fantasy points against Washington, but he's also hit 26 fantasy points 2 other times in the last 4 games. So he has hit 4x value pretty much 3 of the last 4 games. It's pretty solid. And what I do like also is that one of those was against Arizona State with that ugly game environment where he scored 26 points. So I do think Dylan Andrews is squarely in play again. All right, so that wraps things up for the early slate. Hopefully gave you guys plenty of guys that you can be getting into your lineups. So I'm going to go ahead and take a quick breather and hopefully, fingers crossed, DraftKings has the salaries up for the night slate. So from the looks of it, DraftKings does not have salaries up for the night slate yet. However, they have released the games list. So I just want to kind of go through and give some quick thoughts, without seeing the salaries, without doing a whole big deep dive of research. We can go ahead and get a little bit prepared for the night slate and be ready to attack it more tomorrow. If you want some more detailed thoughts on the night slate from me, make sure to join the Fantasy Corner Discord. I can't stress that enough. It's a great community to be part of. But if you want to know some more intricate thoughts on these games, that is where I'm going to be, kind of dispersing them. And then also I do write an article for my Patreon for every single college basketball slate where I profile my core plays as well as my lineup strategy and attack strategy for the slate. And in conference tournament season, you're getting 2 of those articles per day. So it's a great value right now because you're going to get plenty of run from it. I can't sit here and just guarantee that you're going to read those and like instantly win GPPs. It's not that easy, but I do think you can get a lot of sound information, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of process and kind of building blocks that you can help build your own lineup building process in your own kind of studies for being better at college basketball DFS. All right, so Let's go ahead and talk about these games. So, you got Georgetown taking on Providence. So, Providence has two of the steadiest players in all of DFS in Devin Carter and Josh Duro, and now they're taking on Georgetown defense that has been quite porous. In Georgetown games lately, they've been really competitive. They turned into some shootouts. So, it would not shock me to see this game also turn into a shootout, which would not only benefit the Providence guys, but you would see the high usage guys on Georgetown like Jaden Epps and Rowan Brumbaugh probably likely to have a good game as well. But Providence is not exactly the type of team to get in shootouts. So this is a game that could genuinely go either way, and I think it can provide a very high risk, high reward game stack because you know where the points are going to be scored on either side. Now, Rutgers taking on Maryland. There's some injury news you'll need to monitor here because Julian Reese from Maryland missed their last game. They played Matty Traore started at the center, and then Caleb Swanton Rogers, I think is how you pronounce that name, was a guy that also played a lot of minutes as the backup big. But I don't really trust any of those guys. It would either be Julian Reese or bust. And I think you can play Jameer Young. You can play Jameer Young on any slate because his usage rate is so good. And he's also such a scorer that he's capable of just getting hot at any minute. And I do think Young would get a little bit of a boost if Reese is out because he'd have to shoulder more of the scoring load. Now, on the Rutgers side, we have seen a severely underpriced Big Cliff 2 slates in a row. Will DraftKings do that again is the question. And if Reese is out, that's a smash spot. We just saw Kadus Wahab from Penn State absolutely go bonkers against Maryland with Julian Reese out because they had no rim protection, no defense on the interior whatsoever. So if Reese is out, Big Cliff is going to be a big play of mine. I also do like Gavin Griffiths and Jamichael Davis of Rutgers, who've been playing really well lately. Steve Peichel seems committed to giving those two guys minutes. Definitely wouldn't mind going back to them if they're at a reasonable price tag. Vanderbilt taking on Arkansas, so you've got Khalif Battle on the tear that he has been on, now going up against one of the worst defenses in the SEC. I like that. I don't really trust much else outside of Arkansas. It'll be interesting to see what price L. Ellis comes in. He's been somewhat pretty good lately, not consistently, but he's been in the lineup. He's had some good fantasy performances. I wouldn't mind going to him as a value play if he is priced as such. And then on the Vanderbilt side, Tyron Lawrence has kind of taken back over the lead dog role from Ezra Mannion. So he would be my primary interest there against an Arkansas team that likes to get up and down and is also not so great defensively. Kansas State taking on Texas. Kansas State is they're just not a great team to target in DFS. You know that it's going to come from Kaluma, Perry, or Carter. Which one of them it is, TBD. On the Texas side, Asmus and Dessou. It's only, I think that as we get into the postseason, what you saw from Texas last year, they really went into an incredible amount of high ball screens with Marcus Carr and Dylan Dessou and just dared everybody else to figure out how to stop it. And I kind of expect them to do the same here in this postseason, except it's Max Asmus and Dylan Dessou. And I think Asmus is a better shooter than Marcus Carr was. So those two have a chance to have a big time performance. Tyrese Hunter is also coming off of his best performance of the season. So I wouldn't mind playing Tyrese Hunter either. He's a guy who also has a ton of upside. If Asmus or Dessou were to struggle, Tyrese Hunter would be likely having a good game. Got some injury news in the NC State-Syracuse game that you're going to have to look out for. DJ Horn did not play today for NC State, and if he does not play again, then you're going to end up with a boost for Jaden Taylor, who was great today, Michael O'Connell, who was great today, and then Breon Pass, who gave them good minutes off the bench as well. So if Horn is out, those are three guys I would have a ton of interest in on the NC State side. But today, even it was a little murky today because right around the time their lineups locked, they started warmups and DJ Horn was warming up. And then when the game started, he was in street clothes. And so I left him in some lineups just because, I left him in the lineups where I was trailing and I really needed to take a little bit of a chance on maybe a potential low owned DJ Horn. So I left him in. And then when he was in street clothes, it's just like, oh, now those lineups are dead. So a little bit disappointing. College basketball, man-day injury news. But anyway, you're going to need that DJ Horn news before you make any decision on the NC State side. And then for Syracuse, Chris Bell just hit every corner three against NC State the last time they played. I don't think it's likely to happen again, but I think it kind of skewed some of the fantasy points from the previous meeting between these two teams. And this is a game that's going to be one of the highest totals on the slate, so you're probably going to want a few guys from this game. DePaul taking on Villanova. DePaul has kind of started to condense their usage a little bit to Chico Carter and Jaden Henley. Going to be interested to see what they're priced at. This is a terrible matchup in a Villanova team that's going to slow the game down and likely blow them out. And Villanova plays so many guards, I'm just not interested in any of them. I do think that Eric Dixon and Tyler Burton could be intriguing as plays at the big spot, though. Stanford taking on Cal. We've seen that matchup twice already this season. Just it produced a lot of total fantasy points, but not really any big time fantasy performers as individuals. So that's a game that maybe you could stack, but not really like it's just there. Penn State taking on Michigan is a game I do like though because neither of these teams are playing any defense. And with Michigan, you know Doug McDaniel's going to take all the shots. With Penn State, you know that Ace Baldwin is going to take a ton of shots. So this is a game that you could very easily stack, and I think you can get multiple pieces for because both of these teams have been very susceptible on the interior. So who will win out? Will it be Terrace Reed or will it be Caduce Wahab? Will it be Zach Hicks or will it be Will Shetter? And then for Penn State, you've also got Puff Johnson and Raquandis Mitchell who are playing increased minutes off the bench, and certainly two guys that you got to be on the lookout for as value plays. Missouri and Georgia interest me in one way and one way only. Missouri is one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the nation. Well, I should rephrase. They give up offensive rebounds at one of the highest rates in the nation. And Russell Chewa for Georgia is a guy who does get quite a lot of them. He did kind of rip them apart the first time these two teams played, and he would be my main target here on the Georgia side. For Missouri, it's Sean Easton, Tamar Bates, or bust. I had Jesus Carlero Martin in my core for one of the last slates they were on because he looked good. He was trending in the right direction. The usage rates looked good. And then he just gets a big fat goose egg. So I'm done trusting Dennis Gates in his rotations. The only two guys that seem to play every single night consistently for Missouri are Sean East and Tamar Bates. Boston College taking on Clemson is going to have a pretty solid total, but the question is which one of the bigs will avoid foul trouble? You know, Quentin Post and PJ Hall, they're both really good. They both need to avoid foul trouble, and they both have a habit of getting in it. So I don't really know which one is going to win out, but I definitely think that those two bigs is going to be a very interesting matchup. Now you do have a big time injury to account for in the Kansas game. They are they're in trouble because they're going to be without Kevin McCullough as well as Hunter Dickinson. So who is going to step up and score for them? Is it going to be Johnny Furphy? Is it going to be DeJuan Harris? Is it going to be KJ Adams? Is it going to be Nick Timberlake, who started previously for Kevin McCullough? Is it going to be Parker Brown, who is likely to start in place of Hunter Dickinson? I don't know, but I'm pretty willing to guarantee that there's going to be somebody from Kansas who goes for 5X against the Cincinnati defense that is not all that great and just gave up 80 plus points to West Virginia and have given up numerous big time performances to big men all season long. On the Cincinnati side, you're not going up against Dickinson and McCullough. This is a game that they have a chance at winning, and they've been really playing through Day Thomas lately. The only downside is they really priced him up for the early slate on Tuesday, and I hope that he does not return at that same price. If he's in the 6K range, I'm going to like playing him a lot. And then the last game of the night is Arizona State taking on Utah. Arizona State had Jose Perez leave the program recently, so I do think you might see a bit of a usage boost for Frankie Collins and Adam Miller, as well as don't count out Kamari Lands coming off the bench. I think that those three guys are probably my primary interest on this side. And then for Utah, you've got Mr. Triple Double Davon Smith and then the big fella Brandon Carlson. I think that both of those guys are going to be firmly in play. Utah is one of those teams that they're on the bubble, but barely. Like if they were to make it to the final of the Pac-12 tournament, they might have a outside chance at getting in the NCAA tournament, but they likely have to win this tournament to get in. So they're definitely going to be giving it all out, and I definitely think they're going to condense their usage around their two best players, Davon Smith and Brandon Carlson. All right, so that kind of does it for our little quick preview of the night slate. I think that considering that I didn't have the prices in front of me, considering that I haven't really truly deep dived it with all the usage rates and all the minutes, that was just a lot of I don't want to say off the dome because I did a little bit of research, but just kind of a very quick off the cuff thoughts about the night slate. So if you want my full thoughts on the night slate, make sure to join the Discord or make sure to join the Patreon as well. You can get the discussion in the Discord. You can get the articles on the Patreon. And like I said, we have got a very uncertain but jam-packed next week on the schedule. So make sure you follow me on Twitter. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so that way you can get any updates for the show. You can know what's going on, when we're doing it. If we go live, I'll be sure to tweet it out. But if you're subscribed on YouTube, you also know when we go live. If you listen on audio, the lives will largely unaffect you. I did 2 live shows this past weekend where I think the audio still went over pretty well as well. It'll still come out around the same time for the audio. But if you want to watch the YouTube live, make sure you're following me on Twitter. Make sure you're subscribed to YouTube so that way you can be there for that. Like I said, I plan on doing a bracket reaction on Sunday, and then we'll have a full bracket breakdown with a guest on Monday, and then we're going to have DFS shows all throughout the week next week. It's the best time of year. I cannot wait. I'm so looking forward to this NCAA tournament. Now, while you are here, Well, I've got you here. If you like what you saw in this video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. When you hit the like button on YouTube, it really does help me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it. If you're listening on audio, rate and review. I cannot stress how much this helps me out. Like when you rate and review the podcast on audio, it bumps it up to the top of searches. So if you search College Basketball DFS on Spotify, we're the number one podcast that shows up. And that means a lot because it means that anybody who is going to be coming into this space is going to see us first. And so I really do appreciate it when you guys do that. You guys are absolutely the best. We're closing in on 500 subscribers, and I want to get that before the NCAA tournament ends. So if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. All right, that does it for this episode, guys. I'm going to enjoy watching some basketball tomorrow. I hope you guys will as well. And I hope that I gave you guys plenty of information here on this video that is going to help you win some money in college basketball DFS tomorrow. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Best of luck to you on the Wednesday slate, and I will see you next time.